Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for attending what is now our second panel discussion of the 3 days in the Access Industry Forum Knowledge Base. If there's one name that's on the tips of everyone's lips right now, if you have anything at all to do with health and safety, and in particular if you have anything to do with working at height, that word is Lofstedt. And what we intend to do here in the 30 minutes that we have available to us today is via this selected very high profile panel of individuals representing industry is to discuss in particular what's going on with the Lofstedt review, what actually impacts does it have with regards to working at height, and what fundamentally does the panellists here think needs to change in terms of the working at height regulations review. Now, although the HSE can't actually be involved in this panel discussion today, they have agreed that everything that goes on in the next half an hour will be part of the evidence approach that will go into the review of the working at height regulations. So this is a very important discussion, and thank you all for coming. So look, just running down the table from the far end, I'm pleased to introduce you Julie Evans from the National Federation of Builders. She's the Chief Executive. Next we have Mike Long from the National Federation of Roofing Contractors. Sorry, there's two mics on the panel, so and lots of mics here as well. Then we have Chris Wraith from the Access Industry Forum, in particular from the IPAF organisation. Then we're very privileged to have Alison Fryatt from the Department of Work and Pensions. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Alison, you are one of the people on the ground in the government trying to make the Lofstedt report work between Professor Lofstedt and the HSE. That's great. And then finally here we have Mike Pearson representing the Painting and Decorating Association. So in terms of the panel that we have here, we have a very good cross-section of individuals whose specialities involve pretty much on a day-to-day basis working at height. So look, thank you all for coming. Alison, if I can kick off with you, if you don't mind. I think to start off, I think it would be interesting for the people here to know, right themselves from the DWP, what's going on with Lofstedt, where are we, when on earth is it all going to be resolved? Because we're hearing different dates about what's going on. We're hearing different percentages in terms of how much is going to be slashed out of the existing legislation. If you could maybe summarise it in a couple of minutes in terms of where we are now.
Yes, thank you. Can everybody hear me? Great. Yes, I work in the Department for Work and Pensions in the Health and Safety team, and we're the team that advises the Minister on the work of the Health and Safety Executive and on wider health and safety issues. And we oversaw the work of Professor Ragnar Lofstedt on his review of health and safety legislation. The Lofstedt review is just one part of the government's reform package for health and safety. It started with the Law Jung review, Common Sense, Common Safety, which focused on low-risk businesses and the health and safety culture, the compensation culture. That was the responsibility for taking forward the recommendations for that review were passed to my minister in February last year, and the government has delivered around half of that review's recommendations by now. But the minister thought that review didn't go far enough. Our minister, Chris Grayling's position is that health and safety is important for protecting people in the workplace and also for maintaining sustainable growth in the economy, but he believes that the burden of health and safety and red tape, particularly for low-risk businesses, has become disproportionate and needs to be rebalanced. With that in mind, last March 2011, he commissioned Professor Ragnar Lofstedt to undertake a review of health and safety law. Professor Lofstedt didn't have a background in health and safety, but he is an eminent expert in risk management. He works at King's College in London, but also has professorships in America and in his native Sweden. The remit from the review was to consider the opportunities for reducing the burden of health and safety legislation in the UK, whilst maintaining the progress made in improving health and safety outcomes. Now, I know if Professor Lofstedt was here today, he would stress that the word burden was not his word. That was the minister's word. That was the remit that he was given. He would also stress that it wasn't within his remit to look at whether there was any new legislation needed. He was simply asked to look at the existing wealth of legislation and whether it could be simplified and made easier to understand. The professor received 250 responses to his review, which is a very high response rate for a review of this type. And he also considered responses put forward through as part of the government's red tape challenge. Overwhelmingly, he found that there was no case to radically change the health and safety law in this country. But he did feel that some legislation had resulted in additional costs for businesses without actually delivering any recognisable benefits. And he also found there was scope for simplifying codes of practice and guidance to make it easier for business to understand what they were required to do. In the case of the health and the work at height regulations, Professor noted that work at height is the most common cause of workplace fatalities and the second most common cause of major industries. So it's definitely not a case of unnecessary legislation. And I think those of you who heard the talk from Jason this morning will agree that we certainly need legislation in this area. But there is evidence that duty holders and the general public are confused about what the law requires. And also there are suggestions that Britain's regulations may be gold-plated compared with the requirements of the EC legislation that they're based on. So the professor has recommended a review of work at height regulations and the accompanying guidance to ensure they don't go beyond what is proportionate and what the legislation was originally intended to deliver.
Alison, can I jump in there? Would you be able to, because I'm keen that everyone has a good share of discussion here, quick direct answer to you. I understand from Lofstedt he's recommended the work and height reviews be completed by April 2013. Yes. David Cameron went to the press in January saying he wants almost everything done by the end of the year. Which is it?
There is a huge and challenging agenda, and it's HSU's taking forward the bulk of this work. And there are lots of competing priorities, and we need to make sure it all fits in together. The government's reform programme for health and safety goes beyond Lofstedt, so as I say, we've already delivered half of Lord Young's recommendations. Lofstedt is another set of recommendations. We think by the end of this year we will have delivered over half of the overall reform package. The deadline for completing Lofstedt was the end of 2014. So that's the timescale we're looking at for the whole package. But
the work and height regulations you think will fall, certainly won't be this year?
The deadline that the professor set for that was April 2013. Right. HSD still has to do work to scope how they're going to take that forward. Right. We're hoping to publish a progress update on all the Lofstedt recommendations in the summer. Yeah. And I hope at that stage we'll be able to give people a clearer idea of the forward work programme.
Okay, great. Okay, super, thank you. Julia, if I can come to you from the end of the table first. Building, clearly they have a demand probably almost on a daily basis in terms of working at height. Your membership covers pretty much every shape and size of builder that's out there at the moment. In your opinion, you know, the working at height regulations, as you heard Alison say, they're open for review. I think in my terms, effectively what they're saying is let's give the working at height regulations an MOT. You know, they've been out for about 7 years or so. Yeah. Let's have a look and make sure they're still effective. Your members, are they sort of reporting back it's working, things are improving, or do you see an improvement required?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. The issue for members of the NFB, who are right from little tiny members right to people who turn over £500 million, and there's a huge diversity of business in there. And the issue for health and safety and working at heights is absolutely top priority. Everything they do, health and safety comes absolutely first. So in some ways, as a cross-section of the construction industry, they might not be representative of the industry as a whole in that regard, because the health and safety standards are very high. That said, the issue about working at height, which, as you've so rightly pointed out, is the key causer of slips, trips and falls and other things, but it's a key causer of often catastrophic injuries to people. The working at height regs are very, very closely monitored. And for members, the issue of working at height is tremendously important. The Lofstedt review, has come at a time when I think we're seeing other changes in the industry. Obviously, the recession is causing a huge burden upon members. And what they're reporting is sometimes a blunt instrument being used in order to drive compliance. And we've certainly had reports from our smaller members who are in supply chain for major contractors, where the major contractors are saying, you will not use step ladders, which is actually, which is a curiosity in some way, because the whole point of both the existing regulations and any review is about assessment of risk, about education, about assessing what you're doing and ensuring that the method you're using is safe and appropriate and proportionate to what you're doing. Now that's a huge problem, where you're actually having downward pressure applied to not use a particular solution. So there's issues there.
Right.
There's also issues where members are observing, and I wouldn't damn entirely the micro businesses in this, but it does tend to be the smaller contractors, where you're seeing financial efficiencies being made by scaling down the hiring of cherry picker or the hiring of a podium, and instead of that they're using what they see to be a cheaper option just to stay in the game.
Okay.
And that's being reported to me by members, and that's a huge source of concern, that they see this happening.
So price
in the
is very
industry.
much driving the selection of equipment, as opposed to what is the right bit is based on price.
And in a way you can understand that, because if you're standing between bankruptcy and a job, you might well be tempted to put in a price which is reduced because you're not using the appropriate safety equipment. And this is a huge concern at the moment, and I'm sure it's something that the DWP are picking up on as well. So a very interesting perspective here. But I think the key here is it's education and training, but it's got to be appropriate and in context, and understanding the environment that people are working in.
Interesting point, I think we'll come back to that. Mike, moving on to yourself, roofing contractors, clearly almost I suspect everything they do is at working at height by nature of it. In terms of what Julie's picked up, do you guys echo that stance, or what's your view on the regulation?
Yeah, I think she's absolutely right. I mean, there are extreme pressures being put on the smaller companies, not even the bigger companies, to get jobs done that much quicker, that much in more or in a cheaper way. And I think it becomes a bit of a vicious circle, because the job doesn't get done properly, so the main contractor or the larger contractor suffers. Then the retention cycle starts to begin, so retention doesn't get paid, and then the small, micro or even mini or whatever contractor ends up in a situation, no money, being forced into the situation to do things which he shouldn't and should never even dream of doing. But that's just one issue, really. I think that.
And with regards to the roofers, do you think, looking at the regulations, have they worked for you in the last 7 years, or do they need improvements?
I think the essence of the regulation, which is all about being risk-based, forcing people to do correct risk assessment for every job that they do, rather than just do generic stuff, which actually leads to problems. I fully support that. I think there is a problem in interpretation, which will always be, but there was a mention of gold plating. I think interpretation means inevitably from what's probably a responsible contractor, means he's going to over-egg the situation, he's going to do more to cover his backside, being honest, to make sure that he's actually done what needs to be done, and probably a little bit more in case he gets caught out or gets forced into doing something he shouldn't do.
Interesting. So it's the client, and the main contractor, who are doing the over-interpreting. to simply make themselves bomb-proof, if you use my word, in terms of to the legislation?
Sorry.
It's what the point you're making is that it's the client and the contractor in a lot of instances that are making themselves absolutely bomb-proof and watertight in terms of legislations, and by factor that they are making it gold-plating.
Yes, I think in a nutshell, I mean, that pretty much covers it. I mean, it goes wider than that.
Sure.
But that in a nutshell, that's really the essence of people getting forced into a situation which they shouldn't be in.
Okay, Mike, if I can come to yourself, painting, decorating, similar question. You know, you guys must be doing working at height quite a lot of the time. Your views in the last 7 years, has it worked? Is there room for improvement?
I think there's been a lot of improvement over the last 7 years, without a doubt. Reiterate really what some of the other panel members have said about the choices and the pressures to make choices. We were talking with the HSE as a federation last year about rewriting our safety handbook for the industry. And what we actually uncovered with regard to that is that there's still a lot of unknowns amongst not only the industry, but particularly the clients and large major contractors that we're working on behalf of us as a contractor, that they're bringing to bear certain pressures like you mustn't use steps, roof ladders are banned, all sorts of nonsense that gets reiterated. And that's actually turning full circle, because I've heard quite recently that some of the larger UK construction contractors are now saying, please use steps, don't use podiums, and it's not actually come from health and safety, it's about the damage to doorposts and doorways. So we've got a lot of nonsense out there that we've actually got to deal with. And I think another issue that we've got with regards to this is, and this links to the CDM regulations, whereby we're supposed to be given sufficient notice to plan and start the work. And that particularly means having to order specialised access equipment, for example, and you get told on a Friday that the job starts on Monday. And by the way, can you put your scaffold up? That clearly won't work. And that's where I think there needs to be more action and more inclusion within regulations, such as the new work at height regulations, to allow the contractor to have proper time to plan the work and get the right access equipment and make the right choices. I think a lot of the painting contractors, as a part of our membership, are aware of this and do make the right choices, but sometimes, and taking Julia's comment earlier, sometimes get told, you don't need a scaffold for that, can you work off a ladder? Right. Despite that not what we want to do.
Yeah. Chris, coming to you, you're sort of coming from not quite the other side of the table, but you're coming from the point of view of, in particular, IPAF, who are there servicing and supplying equipment to the needs of the decorators, the roofers, the builders, that sort of thing. From your perspective, the last 7 years, has that been good for the working at height industry? I mean, at the end of the day, it's supposed to be reducing incidents and accidents. Do you think?
Well, from a commercial point of view, yes, the work at height has been excellent for the access industry, because you've seen this growth in access of low-level equipment, 2 metres and below. So from that point of view, yes, commercially it's been very good.
Right.
But has it had the effect of reducing accidents? Well, I think what it has done is concentrate people's minds on that low-level area, which probably got overlooked before. If you look at the accident stats, the number of accidents that happen above 2 metres, serious incidents, it is well reported and well recorded. But what goes slightly less noticed is the number of serious injuries that happen below 2 metres. And people have just, if they're working at great heights, they give it some serious thought and some planning. But at low level, in the past, people have just nipped, or I'll just be okay, I'll just stand on this chair, or there's a ladder there, I'll use that. And at least the work at high regulations has actually started to make people look at what equipment they're going to use for accessing low-level work, and put some planning into that and choose the right piece of equipment.
Okay. So specifically what you're saying is the benefit so far on the working height regulations, or one of them, is that it's increased the awareness of working at 2 metres and below.
Yes.
And what provision you've got out there for equipment, etc., that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, brilliant. Okay. One of the other things I wanted to touch on with Lofstedt, which specifically isn't about the working height reviews, but has, I believe, an implication on it, is the recommendation that the self-employed, if they're in a non-risk area, should be exempt from any health and safety legislation, let alone the work in a height legislation. Alison, coming back to you very quickly, I understand Ragnar has picked up a bit of flack about this particular comment.
Yes. I mean, let's be clear, the self-employed recommendation applies to people in occupations that pose no risk of harm to others. So Ragnar and ministers have been quite clear that it wouldn't apply to self-employed builders,
right,
or anybody in a trade where their activities could risk harm to other people. So we're mainly focusing on people working at home, you know, the IT people working at their desk indoors, not the people in the building trades, roofing trades, painting and decorating and so on.
Okay. To be clear though, does that spell it out in the report? Because as far as I'm aware, it's a little vague.
I think the recommendation itself is quite vague, but I think Professor's gone on record since then to clarify what his intention was by the recommendation, and the ministers accepted that.
Right, okay, great, okay, so look, moving on to, we've sort of covered, if you like, a review from each of you in terms of the recommendations. Going forward, we've got an opportunity here, we're at almost like the open consultation process now. This, I think, is a critical opportunity for us to stick our hands in the air, say, we believe this, that, or the other should change. Thoughts? Running down the line, Julia, start again with you.
For me, it's not actually about legislation. It's about getting the industry to step up to the plate on this one. That we know we are far from perfect, and there are lots of reasons for that. But hey, you know, it can't be beyond the industry to actually improve its health and safety performance. We know what to do. There's sufficient legislation there. There's plenty of regulations. There's masses of guidance. There's all the stuff that people can get from colleagues on the platform and others here today. There's more equipment that you can shake a stick at. The stuff's all there. It needs the contractors to actually start performing. And I think that would be the key message.
How are we going to do that?
Education. I think someone said that before, but that's the route. Education and training. Get risk assessment taken in with your mother's milk. That's the stuff. That's the approach.
Okay, Mike, if I can come to you.
I think that's absolutely true. I think maybe we need to look at the regulations, as you said, maybe a slight MOT with the worker height, but. The information's there, it's in place, it's really getting people to use it and getting people to do the job as it should be done using the correct equipment. Okay. With that, I can't see a problem, and that's really what it's about. Okay, well that's good news. Mike, your views here? Grab a mic, yeah.
I need to borrow this one, okay. I reiterate what the others have said, but quite simply I think what we need is simple guidance that supports any regulation. If you look on the website for a piece of regulation, for example, it's written in solicitor speak, as you would expect. So to expect paint and decorating, building contractor or anybody else to have to trawl through 60, 70, 80, 90 pages or more to find out what they want, that's not going to happen. I think we've got to be realistic. So some simple summarised guidance makes a deal of sense. The HSE task sheets that you've got for the asbestos essentials, for example, is perhaps a good model to follow for something along the lines of working at height and enabling people to make the right choices. And I think that would be a really good way forward. Just to comment on what Julia said, we've now got a far greater choice of access equipment at our disposal that we can purchase or hire probably being the most likely, because quite simply, if you have to purchase all the equipment that you could possibly use to paint, shall we say, a 3-storey block of flats, you'd end up having to have another yard to store it all, and bigger vans. So actually what you've got to do is you've got to make it freely available to hire and the latest stuff that you can get, and I think that's the way forward.
Thank you, Mike. Chris?
One of the ways I think we've got to go forward is actually communicate more clearly what is required within the work at height regulations. I see at the present time that there is a lot of, and we've heard today about gold plating, and I think the reason there is that gold plating is when you actually look at where there have been accidents, the HSE and the enforcement authorities haven't taken legal action, put a criminal case against the employer, but you'll find there's been a civil case raised by the injured people. And the gold plating actually goes to those who are trying to protect themselves against a civil case. And so I think we need more clarification on how that can be done without going to the extent of basically banning ladders and banning the flower pots that are suspended or whatever, hanging baskets.
Correct,
and that
correct
kind of
communication, I guess, is what you're talking about, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, that's a fair point. And I think that's certainly coming out as a theme already here. Very quickly, because we're sort of running into the last few minutes, but I quickly wanted to touch on SMEs and micro businesses. You know, it's well documented that they are a hard to reach sector or sectors in terms of influencing conformity and compliance with the existing legislation. I guess across all of your individual memberships, you have an element of that within your own membership that falls into that type of category. Very quickly, what role does trade associations such as yourself, do you think, take an important step forward to help get that message across? Julia, again from you.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the short answer of how to get to some micro businesses is go to trade fairs, because they're an easy way of clumping large numbers of businesses. But that said, and I'd absolutely endorse that, within those companies, they'll also have people they know, people in their supply chains, other contacts. There's don't look at the Trade Fed membership solely as the only people that the Trade Fed will touch, because in fact they're like a pebble in the pool. Here's the Trade Fed, but actually their contacts are huge. So come to Trade Feds and we'll deliver our members, but we'll also deliver exponentially vast numbers of other businesses as well. That's on one side. The other side is, you're absolutely right, it is very difficult to access some very small businesses, and there's a tendency to use legislation here as a big stick in order to enforce compliance, but hey, the HSE have not got the resource to be round inspecting every twit and turn. I think there are issues here about the industry picking up, or government picking up, on the vast body of knowledge that actually gets messages out into the general population. And these days, that's, I hate to say this, guys, tweeting and all the social networking sites, TV advertising. Don't hold back on this kind of stuff. If you really want that message to be delivered, use the context that's out there and that people have got. Every owner of every business will have a mobile phone.
Great. Okay, thank you. Very quickly, because look, we're on the last minutes, and I could stand here all day and talk about it. I'm sure all these people don't want to listen to me all day about that. Anyone else disagree with what Judith said? Anyone else got to add further to what Judith says? Is it all?
I don't disagree at all. I agree completely. I think the hardest to reach are the people who work in the domestic market. We've got paint and decorating members who work solely in that market, builders who work solely in that market. They feel that there are very little pressures to comply, partly because the clients aren't bringing to bear any pressure at all. All they care about is getting the job done for the right price, hopefully not too much, and if possible avoiding VAT, as we all know. The bottom line is those are the harder to reach, and what we find is the only way to reach those sort of people, micro businesses, is a variety of means, some of which Julie's already mentioned, but simply personal contact seems to be the best way to do that. That, unfortunately, is extremely time consuming, but if you're going to provide information, bite-sized chunks is always best. So any sort of summary, as opposed to what I said earlier, a full set of regulations, that's not going to be read and understood. So it needs to be something small and defined to the point.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're out of time. I'm really sorry. I wish we could talk much more. I think, summing it up, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, what we're talking about here, and this is the message to the HSC from this panel, is that we're talking about a couple of things. We're talking about terminology, we're talking about communication, and we're talking about utilising trade bodies and trade associations to help get that message out there. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. Just to let you know before we finish, as you may have not noticed, this whole panel discussion has been filmed. The intention is that this will then shortly appear on the AIF website, and the intention is that we would also then put a facility next to the film that not only can you watch it again, but you can then carry on the discussion. So I'm sure I would like to add time to reach out to the audience and get some questions. We've run out of time today, but you have a facility on the website to do that, which will also go into the evidence report to the HSE. That really is all I have to say for it. Thank you very much for the panel for coming here. It's been very interesting, and thank you all for watching. Thank you.
What benefit has the discussion had today in having so many people on the panel?
It's really helpful for government to get a chance to go out and talk to people firsthand about how they see health and safety should be performed. So it's been helpful to hear people from the various trade associations get their experiences, which we can then feed back into policy making and hopefully make better health and safety law and health and safety guidance.
Hi Chris, can you tell me what you thought of the input on the discussion from the Department of Work and Pensions?
I thought it was very beneficial in giving us a background as where we are and how the government is working. But what I thought was interesting was that there's already talk of a Lofstedt review of the review. That wasn't really touched on. So the government at one point is being pushed to get the information out, but it is also being pushed to make sure it does a thorough job. And therefore, in my opinion, it's damned if it gets it out quickly, and it's damned if it takes too long. So in a very difficult position. That's the basic message I got from Alison.
Can you tell me what benefits you feel that the discussion panels had at today's event?
Yes, by all means. The National Federation of Builders places a hugely priority on health and safety. So to be here at this event and taking part in the panel discussion is really great to get all the messages out that is so important to contractors. The panel discussion, I thought, was extremely well balanced. Not only were there contractors like the builders of the NFB, there's the roofers, there's scaffolders, painters and decorators, as well as Alison from the department. So a really well-furnished debate there, and I thought very, very balanced, very responsive to what the industry needs, while recognising the overriding importance of health and safety. So well done to you.
What did you learn from today's discussion?
I think I just learned about the importance of conveying information in the right way to the small contractors. It's about translating the information, exactly what the panel has said, into easy chunks that people can understand.